Are you ready for a show that talks sports from the fans' point of view?
We've seen Michael Jordan score 37 points a game in his era. How many could he score in today's NBA?
There's not a player out there who I'd rather have than LeBron James.
Are you ready for a show that isn't afraid to challenge anyone when it comes to sports? If Adam Silver really wanted to fix tanking in the NBA, he would stop rewarding teams by giving them the best chance to win the draft lottery.
I mean, how many times will Roger Goodell drop the ball on handling domestic violence in the NFL?
Look, athletes have every right to talk politics, but if the fans stop tuning in, that's their right.
Then you're ready for Talk Back, a podcast where two fans debate the media narrative and discuss the world of sports as we see it.
Welcome to the show.
Welcome to another edition of Talk Back. I'm one of your hosts, Eric Nesbit, and with me is Justin Gay, your host and director of content, with a full lineup of NFL, NBA, and NASCAR action for episode 225. Just a little reminder, if you like the show, head over to Apple iTunes, give us a 5-star review. That helps us jump in the ratings and the rankings. When people search for sports podcasts, they'll find Talk Back. We appreciate your support. This week on the show, the Eagles, are they now finished for the season? We'll talk about that and the other divisional foes that they're facing. Boy, there's a lot of stories coming out from the NBA, but one of them most interesting to us is the Philadelphia Sixers have made a move, and it's a big splash. And then NASCAR, the championship four, have been decided. Is it the right four for the most excitement and drama on the track in Miami Homestead? We've got all of that and more on episode 225 of Talk Back.
It is time for segment one here on episode 225. Let's jump into the Week 10 NFL action, talk about some of the biggest stories happening in the NFL, and let's start in Philadelphia with those defending champion Eagles. Eric, I know you didn't enjoy the game on Sunday night too well as Dallas came into Philly. This seemed like a game that Philly really needed as they are getting ready to enter just a brutal stretch of their schedule that includes the Saints and the Rams upcoming. But the defending champs, they find themselves now at 4-5. They are 2 games behind the Washington Redskins there in the NFC East. But Eric, this team feels like it has issues right now on both sides of the ball. That's what we saw last year. This Eagles team, they felt like a complete team, or when one unit was down, the other unit picked them up. It seemed like there was multiple games last year where the defense got a big turnover, got a pick six, got a scoop and score. They had a touchdown on special teams, or if the defense was struggling, Carson Wentz and that offense picked them up, and then even Nick Foles into the playoffs did the same thing. This year it feels like both sides of the ball, there's struggle going on. So when you watch this team, what are you more disappointed in right now, the offense or the defense?
No, I think you're exactly right. I think it's a pertinent question to what's going on in Philadelphia because there are disappointments on both sides of the ball. To your point, in that game the other night, Dallas didn't score a lot of points in the first half, so the defense was holding together as much as they could, although the last play of the first half really upset me, but they were holding together for the most part. It was a 6-3 type of ball game for most of the first 2 quarters, and yet the Eagles offense couldn't get it in gear. They couldn't get it going. I know I texted you and said, what's going on with Golden Tate? The Eagles bring him in. He clearly doesn't have the full playbook yet, and he's not on the field that much. So it's a weapon that's not out there for the Eagles. Meanwhile, it's a good thing that we brought in Jordan Matthews because I feel like he's catching a lot more balls than anyone else, certainly more than Aguilar right now and more than Alshon Jeffrey, who had a couple of key drops. Then you've got what's going on in the backfield, as we've talked about throughout the season, with Jay Ajayi's injury, Blount being in Detroit. You're kind of mixing it together with Smallwood and Clement. I actually really like this Josh Adams kid. I feel like he has something, so he needs to develop. But Zach Ertz is an all-star, and Carson Wentz is trying his best. Outside of that, the offense just doesn't seem to be ticking. So in the first half of that game, I think the offense wasn't responding to what the defense was giving them. Then you flip that over to the second half where points are being scored. Dallas scores, the Eagles score. Dallas scores, the Eagles score. And I feel like, okay, now we've got something going. But in a 2020 game, guess who gives up the big plays, especially on third down? It's that defense. So, Justin, some of the injuries in the secondary are starting to mount up. You had Mills already out for the game. Darby gets injured during the game. That's going to become a story and a problem for the Philadelphia Eagles down the stretch because, as you said, at 4-5, they can't give up any more games. With a weak secondary going against the Saints or the Rams or even maybe later against the Texans, they could get blown out. And that's a big concern for me. So I think I'm going to side with the sports bettors at this point, which says that the Eagles have only a 35% chance to make the playoffs. And I think that it might be realistically even worse than that. So I'm concerned on both sides of the ball, Justin. I want to hear your take, but Wentz and that running game just are not chugging along. The receivers just aren't doing what they need to score points outside of Zach Ertz. Then you've got a defense that's getting weak in the secondary. The front four are still pressuring other quarterbacks quite well, but it's just not holding up for 4 quarters in terms of not giving up points. There's a lot of concerns in Philadelphia right now, Justin. Not only are they not going to defend the Super Bowl this year, they might not make the playoffs.
Yeah, that's the crazy thing about this is the fact that we even have to ask a question like this of what side of the ball is worse for a defending Super Bowl champion that really didn't lose a lot of key pieces on this team, and they're 4-5 so far. And we talked about this multiple times now, the fact that it's just different when you're the champs, that everybody's coming at you. You're the litmus test for every team. They want to be able to say, here's how we compare to last year's Super Bowl champion. And I don't know that Philly has responded to that. On the offensive side of the ball, you've got Wentz coming off of an ACL. I don't think he's looked the same. He just doesn't look like he's returned to the form of last year yet, where he was shaking guys off and making all these crazy plays and just being this super mobile quarterback, similar to what you see with Mahomes in Kansas City. It wasn't that Wentz was always running. It was the fact that he could extend plays, and now it feels like he's not doing that as much. But they lost to Jai, and that's where I don't understand, because I feel now the offense is wounded and the defense isn't responding to help pick them up. You already see the secondary issues this team had. Jalen Mills seems to be a disaster in the secondary all the time on that team. Now they're banged up in the secondary. This is where I get frustrated with the media. Howie Roseman gets praised all the time for the moves he made. The move last year to go get Jay Ajayi and the fact they put Nick Foles on this team and all this stuff. But we've talked weeks ago about the fact that this Philadelphia Eagles team needed a running back, that they had a bunch of just guys behind Ajayi. They let Blunt go in free agency. But Wendell Smallwood, Corey Clement, Josh Adams, they don't scare anybody. You had an opportunity where you were going to take your assets for next year and go invest in a player, and they go get another wide receiver, which I didn't feel like they needed because he doesn't really stretch the field for them. They already have Ertz, they have Dallas Goedert, and they have 2 wide receivers that basically do a lot underneath or in the middle of the field with Aguilar and Jeffrey. They need a guy that can, if they were going to go get a receiver, they needed somebody that could stretch the defense. Instead, they get a guy that does the same thing that all their other guys basically do. So I didn't understand that, why they didn't go get a running back and why they didn't work on their secondary, because I felt like that was the parts of this team that really needed help. And right now they're both so wounded, they can't pick each other up, Eric. And I think that showed on Sunday night that they just got exposed by a Dallas team that coming in limping off of a 14-point loss at home on Monday, coming in on a short week, they looked explosive and their run game actually looked really good. And that kind of takes me to the next question I wanted to parlay into you. We saw Dallas go out and make a move to fill a need they had at the wide receiver 1 spot. Now you've seen Amari Cooper with them for 2 games, and you finally saw that Cooper was getting double-digit targets. And then Zeke ran wild on Sunday night versus Philly. So a team like Dallas making a move for Amari, do you feel like that's going to open this offense up more, give Zeke more running lanes? Or was this just a Philadelphia defense that's kind of banged up? They play a wide 9 scheme that leaves them open to be gashed in the run game.
No, I think that's a fair point, and I think you're right about that. I think the secondary is going to become a major problem for the Philadelphia Eagles, and so when you see Amari Cooper, who's a good receiver, probably re-energized coming into Dallas outside of what he just left in Oakland, which, as we know, is a complete dumpster fire now, he's probably a piece that they needed. I mean, look, how many times have we talked this year about them going through the season with Cole Beasley and Terrence Williams and guys that really aren't going to light the world on fire for you as your main receivers. Now you put Amari Cooper in there, who's more of a downfield threat, definitely has a higher catch percentage, certainly a guy you can count on when you throw him the ball in tough spots, and that showed on Sunday night. So does it open the lanes for Ezekiel Elliott? I think the proof was in the pudding. Ezekiel had a fantastic night. The Eagles aren't exactly the easiest team to run on. Elliott burned them for 150 yards. So I think all of those things combined, you might see a Dak Prescott and Ezekiel Elliott combo more in tune with what you saw 3 years ago when Dez Bryant was actually effective in the wide receiver game for the Dallas Cowboys. So I think that's a big move, and I think it's a point well taken because you see a Cowboys team who they looked like they were down and out at 3-5. Now instead of being 3-6, they beat the Eagles. They're 4-5. They're actually ahead of them due to the head-to-head, and they're only 2 games behind the Redskins, who I don't know that we're totally sold on them as the divisional winner of this conference. So whether you're the Eagles or the Cowboys sitting there at 4-5, you've got to believe that 2 games can be made up for the season. Being that the Eagles have a disastrous schedule coming up, it's not going to be them. And the Cowboys now have added pieces in the right places, as you pointed out. I think they're now in the catbird seat in that NFC East. They have an opportunity later this year to beat the Redskins, actually just in a couple of weeks. They can take care of the Eagles again if they want. The toughest game on their schedule is probably New Orleans. They've got to play those Saints as well. But if they can get past the Falcons this week, which, I mean, look, the Falcons are losing games that they have no business losing. So I think Dallas can beat the Falcons. They're now looking at themselves as a team that can believe it's possible. And I think that makes a big difference, too, in their locker room. Look, we're not sold on Jason Garrett. Everybody knows that. There's problems there. He maybe needs to make the playoffs to save his job. However, now that you've added a piece to this team in the right area, Amari Cooper as a wide receiver that Dak Prescott can look at, I think it makes this team more effective and makes them a bit more of a scare in that NFC East.
Well, Dallas certainly saved their playoff chances by getting to 4-5. They are in a logjam with the Eagles and 4 other teams, really. If you look at Carolina as sort of the lead dog in the wild card race in that NFC, then there's 6 other teams that are sitting there in the 5-3-1 range, like the Vikings, or 4-5 or 5-4. So there's a lot going on now. Really, you look at the schedule upcoming for the Eagles, they're going to have to figure out a way to beat a really good team. They still do have 2 against Washington. Even if they can find a way to split against the Saints-Rams, they keep themselves alive. Washington's so beat up right now that you really don't know week to week what you're going to get out of them. They went into Tampa, won an ugly game. But Eric, week 10, I think the headline coming out of this week was just inconsistent play up and down the slate. And let's take it to Tennessee, where New England went in, and you would think that New England could take care of Tennessee regardless of where the game was being played. But Tennessee absolutely dominated that game. They put it on them. Tennessee now has 2 big wins in a row and could have had a third one had they played that game out in London instead of going for 2. They failed. They lost that game to the Chargers, who are one of the hotter teams in the NFL as well. So the Titans definitely on the upswing here. They're just 1 back now of the Texans for that AFC South. Are you buying the Titans as a contender there in the South?
Boy, when they play like that, it's hard not to buy into them. I mean, the Patriots are a perennial contender, and so anytime a team beats the Patriots, because it's going to be one of probably only 2 or 3 losses that the Patriots take all season long, you have to look at that team and say, okay, did that mean anything? But the way the Titans beat the Patriots, to me, that did mean something. Yeah, I don't like the mistake they made in London. I think that was a bad move. And we talked about the fact that that move could have big consequences in the standings. Now you look at them getting some momentum, getting some wins, and you think, boy, if we had just tied or won that game rather than taking sort of a dumb loss, could that make a difference in overcoming the Texans? The problem for the Titans is that you just don't know from week to week which Titans team you're going to get. Some of that starts with Mariota. Some games he looks really good. Some games he doesn't. I wouldn't compare him to sort of the peaks and valleys maybe that a Blake Bortles has. But again, Mariota just hasn't quite seemed like the Mariota of old this season. But at the times that he does, and look at their receivers and what they did, some of the catches they made and some of the routes that they ran, that was really encouraging to see, because when you have that kind of weaponry downfield, it makes a big difference. Keep in mind, this is a Titans team that lost one of their biggest weapons, Delaney Walker, right away in the season. That was a big hit for them. Not to mention, this two-headed monster at running back that we were excited about doesn't seem to be kind of working out for them. And Derrick Henry, I can't figure the guy out. He was a superstar in college and just hasn't seemed to